Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar on Essential Mathematics and the Victorian Curriculum 2.0 this afternoon. I'm Marcus Maculitis, the Education Resource Consultant for the Western Victoria region here at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. Before we make our start, in the spirit of reconciliation, Cambridge University Press and Assessment acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This webinar today will be recorded and you'll receive a link to the recording as well as an opportunity to give some feedback on your experience, and you can expect to see an email within a week. You'll be able to enter questions in the chat box as we will be monitoring that throughout the webinar, or you can also wait until the Q&A session and add them then. It's also important to note that today's webinar does have quite a large number of attendees and there'll be a limited time for Q&A, but if we don't get to all of your questions, we will follow up with answers afterwards. Also, towards the end, I'll be detailing publication dates, availability and product pricing, so please stay tuned for those. Okay, now I'd like to introduce to you our presenters for this session today. We have David Greenwood. David is the Head of Mathematics at Trinity Grammar School in Melbourne, and he's got more than 30 years experience teaching mathematics from years 7 to 12. He is the lead author for the Cambridge Essential Mathematics series, and he has authored more than 80 titles for the Australian curriculum and for other states and territories. He specialises in analysing curriculum and the sequencing of course content for school mathematics courses. He also has an interest in the use of technology for the teaching of mathematics. We'll also be hearing from Scott Halligan. Scott, my colleague, is our lead publisher for mathematics here at Cambridge, and he's been pivotal in the development of all of our current maths resources. And during the Q&A session later on, we'll also be joined by Ben Staker, our development editor from our maths team. So now, David, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Great to be here, and thanks everyone for coming in to hear a little bit about the Victorian Curriculum 2.0. It's very exciting here at Cambridge because there's a whole range of new content that we're going to consider, and we're very excited to be able to add new features into the resources for the Cambridge University Press series. We'll be looking at the new VC content in this webinar today, looking at the 10A pathways, quite a few changes at year 10, so that's interesting to talk about that. Algorithms and technology and modelling are featured in this webinar as well. We're very excited to talk to you about the Cambridge Diagnostic System that has been developed for the new series and the other resources that we have on offer as well. And Scott will certainly be helping me describe some of those. Okay, so let's start off and just look at the new Victorian Curriculum 2.0 and see what's changed. So first of all, we used to have three major strands. There they are: number and algebra, measurement and geometry, probability and statistics. But under the new curriculum, similar to the new Australian curriculum, we now have the 6 strands separated. So not grouped together, separated with geometry being rebadged as space. So that's one small change. Another change that you'll notice with the curriculum is that the sub-strands underneath those 3 major strands have been removed. And so we now just have the 6 major content areas going then straight to the descriptors and the elaborations. And you can see here this little extract from the Victorian curriculum. We have the strand number, and then we go straight to the content descriptor, and then all the different ideas and elaborations are next to that in the curriculum with no substrand to consider. Remember, the elaborations are there. They're good suggestions, but not necessarily comprehensive or compulsory content. There are many other good suggestions, of course, that are not listed in those elaborations, but there's really some very good ones there. And certainly at Cambridge, we have tried to cover them all. Okay, so in general, you would not say that this is an entire rewrite of the Victorian curriculum. There has been many refinements and some content changes, and you would say perhaps more of an emphasis on investigation and modelling, technology and algorithms, and also Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. In Year 7, we have put a small list together of what we think are the major changes in the curriculum content. We have a descriptor there that's a little bit clearer now about using expanded notation in place value. There's a new descriptor in the algebra strand about manipulating formulas. We have volume of triangular prisms new to Year 7. That's the M02 descriptor. We have some work with circles and measurements associated with circles. So the introduction to pi and circumference is new to Year 7. That was MO3. We're a little bit clearer with our statistical investigations and probability simulations. You could argue they were there beforehand, but I think there is clarity, or more clarity, if you like, about these types of things in the curriculum. And the algorithms content descriptors have been refined as well. In Year 8, it's fair to say that the financial applications are stronger, as is linear modelling. Pythagoras' theorem is now in the core, and many of you, especially those who might have used the Cambridge Essential series in the past, may have used many of the extending sections covering things like Pythagoras' theorem. But now it's in the core, so we would expect to be able to teach it at Year 8, or at least introduce Pythagoras' theorem at Year 8 for further study in Year 9. There is a new content descriptor in space, 03, which is about 3D objects and coordinates, which is interesting. More on algorithms, investigations, and simulations, certainly at Year 8 as well. In Year 9, there is some clarity around irrational numbers. And probably the most significant change in Year 9, I think, is more work in expanding and factorising quadratics and working with parabolas. There are many more content descriptors in the algebra strand in this area, and that's probably the most significant change at Year 9. Looking at errors in measurement and accumulation of errors, sampling methods, and again, more clarity with simulation, data displays, and algorithms at Year 9 as well. In Year 10, errors in repeated calculations, very clear, because we have descriptors relating to this area in number and also in measurement. An old descriptor relating to exponential relations and equations that used to be 10A is now in the core content and is referenced at A11 and A14, A standing for algebra. There is more clarity with technology and graphing. Logarithmic scales is new, and that is in measurement. There are a number of modelling content descriptors spread throughout the curriculum, but it's very clear that this is an important aspect of the new curriculum. Networks, graph theory, space 02 is something that's in the Victorian curriculum, as well as the Australian curriculum, I might add, and statistical investigations as well is ST05. So this is new core content for Year 10. For 10A, Victoria is retaining the Year 10A pathway. And here's some new content that is now explicitly listed. So solving simple trig equations is now explicitly there. Counting principles and factorial notation. So this is what some people might call combinatorics. arrangements, permutations, and selections and combinations, and maybe some applications to probability there. Function notation has returned in the Victorian curriculum. It was there a few generations ago, but we haven't seen it for a while, but function notation has returned, and an introduction to rates of change, so average rates of change and instantaneous rate of change without really going too far into calculus. But yes, definitely an introduction to rates of change in 10A. What might be interesting to you is to learn that there is some deleted content from the Australian curriculum, but that deleted content has been retained in Victoria in the 10A pathway. So sine, cosine rule and area rules is still in Victorian curriculum 10A pathway, along with pyramids, cones and spheres in measurement. Graphs of circles and hyperbolas is in the Victorian and not in the Australian. And the polynomial work that you might have been used to is still here in the Victorian curriculum 10A. So there's a lot on offer in the Victorian 2.0 10A content descriptors. Just before I go on to Cambridge's approach, I just want to highlight three words or three sets of words that appear in the new Victorian curriculum. So just doing a quick search from years 7 to 10, there are 34 references to the word algorithm, 61 references to the word modelling, and 33 to Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples, which is quite interesting. Now, these are not necessarily straight from the content descriptors, but mostly from the elaborations. So I just wanted to make that clear. I didn't want to deceive you in any way in making you think that every single lesson had to have an algorithm or a modelling investigation, but you can see there's definitely a strong connection with these ideas. And that played some role in how we prepared our resources in the new series at Cambridge. So let's now just talk about some of the ways in which Cambridge have responded to these changes in the curriculum. First of all, I want to point out that we are going to retain or have retained many of our popular key features. And one feature which is going to be retained is the high degree of differentiation, where the authors have subgrouped questions into the key proficiency strands of the Victorian curriculum. So building understanding is now part of the introductory material, and this gives teachers the flexibility to use the material inside their lesson introduction or perhaps as a task to be completed at home in a flipped learning model. The fluency, problem solving and reasoning questions are retained, and also the enrichment questions are retained in every lesson. And these are extensions which are designed to challenge students within the topic at hand and also provide that strong connection with extension material with links to higher level content. This might provide internal acceleration opportunities without necessarily having to stream students into groups.
And so David, just before you go on, or as a continuation of what you were just talking about with the proficiency strands, although there has been a slightly different approach within the Victorian curriculum compared to last time in relation to how the proficiency strands are located inside the curriculum, that they're now about being embedded inside content descriptors versus having this alternative access by which to look at the curriculum as a whole. We've retained this out of the for purposes of practicality, but also consistency of approach to every single lesson. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, it's certainly been the foundation of our structure and was a good influence on authors, if you like, because it was nice to be able to sit there and try to come up with exercises that not only just graded from easy through to challenging, but to also come up with questions that did try to cover various aspects of the different proficiencies. So if reasoning was looking for questions which required students to generalize or explain or justify, then the authors sat down to try to come up with questions that did those very things. And you look, not every question can be pigeonholed into one proficiency strand, and we understand that. But it was certainly a great motivator to have a good range of questions to cover the different proficiencies across the curriculum.
Yep, thanks.
Those proficiency strands are reflected in some of the background documentation, which is available to teachers. This is just an extract from one of the work programs where the different differentiated pathways, foundation, standard, and advanced, are available to the students. And this allows teachers to be able to offer students with varying backgrounds or ability backgrounds without necessarily having to highly stream their classes in or offer different ability groupings. Those documents will be available with the new series, of course, as well. The progress quiz will be retained. It's about halfway through the chapter and can provide a formative assessment tool. And this is available in the text, in the printable version. It's also available as a printable handout and also available on the interactive, on the digital, which is auto-marked. So there's different ways that teachers could use that formative assessment tool throughout the unit. Similarly, the applications and problem-solving questions that we put about 3/4 of the way through the unit offer extended response style questions and try to apply what they have learnt so far in the topic. They work on students' communication and problem-solving skills, and these might provide some ideas for teachers with regard to a mid-topic investigation or application task. The learning intentions were new to the previous editions, and we will retain these. These help to link sections to the curriculum documents. They help teachers plan and lay out their lessons, and also help link the skills and the knowledge of that section to the success criteria of the unit of work. I just mentioned the success criteria. These have been updated and refined. Where we have altered examples and key content in the sections throughout a unit of work, the success criteria have been updated to suit. Especially with the new diagnostic tool, which we'll talk about soon coming online, that certainly gave us a nice strong connection with the key skills that need to be taught in the section, and that's reflected very strongly with these success criteria statements, which include, by the way, examples and now the answers also provided inside the text or the interactive.
And they also come very directly out of the learning intentions at the start of every lesson, right, David?
Yeah, strong connection made there with the learning intentions. So teachers can provide that connection at the beginning and possibly at the end of the lesson or the end of the unit of work. We will be retaining the now you try questions. And these, you might remember, are linked to all the examples. So there are examples there with their videos and so on, but after the examples, there's a now you try. And this will allow teachers to perhaps use the examples in their lessons, but then also give students something very similar to try, which they could use in class or even in a flipped learning model if they required students to do these at home. Now, the algorithmic thinking chapter is being retained, and we have done some more work in this area. And so we've decided to move this chapter online, where teachers may wish to use this as a unit of work sometime during the semester, but they may wish to then combine this with some of the new activities, which I'll talk about in a minute. So that chapter is moved online, but we have now developed a brand new feature. So I'm now moving into some of the new features that we will have for the Victorian Curriculum series. So we're going to expand on the algorithmic theme here, and we've decided to create a whole range of new technology and computational thinking activities. So across 7 to 10, there are 40 activities with 1 per chapter. And these activities are designed to introduce students to the types of problems which we might want to solve using an algorithmic approach rather than, say, an algebraic approach. So, for example, classifying shapes using a flowchart, solving a maximum or minimum problem using a spreadsheet or some other numerical tool, or simulating cues using a spreadsheet or simple pseudocode or a flowchart, or even construction of geometric shapes using an algorithm. And the structure of each activity is not only there with the student in mind, but the teacher as well. We've written them to provide a very accessible entry point so that the problem can be solved using technology and with an algorithm. And we've done that by creating a getting started component where we warm students up to the activity and provide some background first. We then have an algorithm section, which is usually an ordered list of instructions, and it could involve a flowchart as well, or another repeated process. So students are going through a process and they repeat this algorithm to explore the problem. Every activity also has a technology component to it. And in most cases, they are spreadsheets, dynamic geometry, graphing calculators, and a little bit of pseudocode, although that's not a strict requirement of the curriculum. But all those technologies are freely available, and with Desmos graphing and Desmos geometry being linked directly via the Cambridge Resource Interactive. We finish these activities with an extension or enrichment section where we might say adjust parameters, we might look for more depth, or we might be building more complex algorithms as well. So that is the technology and computational thinking activities, and we are confident they cover not only the content descriptors, but also the elaborations and other ideas that we've had for many chapters right across the series. I'm not expecting you to read that one, but just to give you an idea of what one of these activities might look like. So this one, for example, is a simulation looking at the possible number of wet days in a 10-game soccer season, looking at some data that may have had from a previous season. The getting started looks at previous data and tries to decide on the probability that it will rain on a particular day, or making simple estimations about future games. The technology involves simulating wet or dry conditions for the next 10 games using Excel formulas. And an algorithm is used where students would repeat the simulations to achieve multiple sets of results. And the extension is improving the simulation and the spreadsheet formulas to consider the long-run proportion. A Year 10 example looks at solving quadratic equations numerically. The getting started is exploring values of a function for a given value of x, using technologies Excel again, or graphing software to explore a solution numerically with limited accuracy. The algorithm part or component of the investigation looks at using the zoom function on graphing, or zooming in with a spreadsheet by using smaller increments, just like you would say using the bisection method, say in VCE math methods. The extension looks at equations that really can't be solved algebraically at all, and so these methods are therefore essential.
David, just before you move on to modelling, to extend your comments on the technology and computational thinking activities, could you talk briefly about the links between these kinds of activities in terms of the way that they might be good preparation as students move through 7 to 10 into their VCEs, especially if they're aiming to do methods and specialists, which we know there's been, it was one of the more controversial additions for the new study design, particularly for methods and specialists. These are not new ideas, obviously, but they were new to VCE in this particular way, and they were accessible on exams
Mm.
for the first time. So could you talk a little bit about how these might be good preparation for some of those topics?
Yeah, so when we've created these tasks, we've tried to set things up so students think algorithmically without necessarily getting into the detail, say, of pseudocode. So even using things like an Excel and using a formula and filling down is really starting to get students to think about algorithms and repeated processes. And then combining that with flowcharts, I think, is a good idea. So we've used the proper shapes and everything that would lead into the VCE, but the problems we have are fairly simplistic, and students should be able to use things like flowcharts and Zoom features on graphing functions and spreadsheets and so on. So the ideas are relatively simple, but they do lead to those content descriptors at VCE. And look, that example that I mentioned before about zooming into a solution with a quadratic equation is really like the Year 11 bisection method, but we're just not getting into the formal pseudocode and using the bisection method formula. Another feature that we have spent some time on is the modelling activities. And we can see with the new curriculum, there were plenty of references to the word modelling and many content descriptors talking about modelling and applying the content. So a little bit like the computational and technology activities, we have created one modelling activity per chapter as well, and with scaffolded parts, so students and staff are not thrown in the deep end, a little bit like the activities I mentioned before. The preliminary component of the modelling tasks aims to warm students up to the problem and provide some background. We then work through the different sections of the modelling task, and these have been divided up into the common rubric that's kind of accepted around Australia and even around the world of how one should head down the modelling path with mathematics. And that is to have a formulation section, a solving section, evaluating and verifying, and communicating. The idea being that if students follow this structure, they would be able to produce a nicely constructed report touching on all the elements of the above mentioned rubric. Here's an example. Year 7, water restrictions apply depending on the percentages of water in the dam. Students could formulate by writing down given information, interpreting, being clear about what levels trigger the various water restrictions, and analysing the given information. They'd solve by drawing graphs, perhaps, considering trends, calculating percentages. And they might evaluate and verify by making predictions, checking results, and so on and so forth. And then they'd finish by communicating, summarising, and describing their findings. This Year 10 example is all about a house with a veranda being added on, and the modelling of the veranda on the side of the house using, say, integer values for the area or for the width. They might formulate by drawing diagrams, establishing rules for the area. They might solve by exploring areas for given widths, and they might explore widths for given areas and solve equations as appropriate. They might evaluate and verify by comparing solutions. They might look at integer solutions only and compare that with solutions that might be exact values or decimal results, and then communicating by making conclusions and communicating results. So one of these for every chapter right across the series. As I mentioned earlier, there are some elaborations which refer to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and here are two of those Victorian curriculum elaborations. So one of our responses here is to come up with investigations, a little bit like the modelling tasks, with a number per year level dedicated to exploring the curriculum content relating to First Nations peoples. The idea was to write an investigation which is not tokenistic, but tasks which focus on the elaborations in the curriculum. And these, Scott, I believe, are digital resources. Are you able to elaborate on that a little bit?
That's right. Yeah, they'll be available through the teacher resource website within the online teaching suite. These elaborations, if I understand correctly, Dr. Chris Matthews and Dr. Katie Morris from ATSMA were very instrumental with working with ACARA in the first instance in the development of the new Australian Curriculum 9.0 to include content of this kind in a very meaningful way. And these have come down in a Victorian context. I think within the Victorian curriculum, they also talk about examples of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's perspectives from elsewhere around the country as well. But they are they're very new to the maths curriculum, both the AC 9.0 and the Victorian Curriculum 2.0. So our aim, as you said, David, is to cover these in the kind of depth via these investigations to properly tell the stories that are behind the elaborations and the intentions behind them.
Thank you. All right, now just moving on to what are the big changes in the Cambridge series that people will notice. Many people who use the Cambridge series may find that there are some new Victorian curriculum content, but the sections were already there. And so in some ways, many chapters have not changed a great deal because the sections were already there covering that content anyway, perhaps as an extension section or just as an extension that we felt was appropriate for the unit of work. So that meant that the number of sections that had to be rewritten were not incredibly huge, but here's a few of them. Here are the big ticket items for the series. So in year 7, because of the refinement with ratios in the Victorian curriculum and in the Australian curriculum, I should say, as well, we have decided to rewrite those sections and place a stronger emphasis on introduction to ratios and applications of those. And that is a much stronger lead into the ratios and rates unit for year 8. The volume of triangular prisms led to new sections and circle measurements as well, with the introduction to pi and circumference certainly led to new sections in measurement. In year 8, there are a number of refinements, but the main one being introduction to the idea of thinking about space in 3 dimensions and 3D coordinates. In year 9, errors in sampling gave rise to new sections. In year 10, a more significant change with sections relating to networks or graph theory, logarithmic scales, the combinatorics that I mentioned before. Percentiles is now there because it's more explicit in the curriculum, and two-way tables to analyse the relationship between categorical variables is in the curriculum as well. So that led to new content in the series. Here's some evidence of those things. Year 7, circles, pi and circumference. There's the 3-dimensional coordinate systems at year 8, looking at not just points, 3-dimensional points X, Y, Z, but also looking at 3-dimensional spaces, blocks as squares and cubes, which is perhaps how you might think of it if you were, say, in a car park and had to describe your position in that type of 3-dimensional space. In year 10, here's some evidence here of the 4 sections that we've added for the core work on networks. Introduction, isomorphic and planar graphs, trails, paths, Eulerian circuits, and shortest path problems as a simple application of networks. In year 10 as well, this is 10A material, and this is all the work on counting principles and factorial notation, arrangements, selections, and some applications in probability. Fairly straightforward. It's at year 10 level, but it is a year 10A piece of content, which would lead quite nicely into math methods or specialist mathematics, I think. Other things that have changed in year 7 to 10, many people might be pleased to know that year 7 now has 10 chapters, not 11, where some work has been done to combine the geometry chapters. Given the refinement of the new curriculum, we felt comfortable now combining those two chapters. So Year 7 has 10. The order of the chapters has been retained, and also for Years 8 and 9, the order is retained as per the previous editions. Year 10 is a little different because of the large number of changes with the curriculum. So we have the networks coming in, the polynomials are still there, we have exponentials and logarithms is now more important. So this led to the authors thinking about some more logical groupings, and this resulted in a few changes with the chapters. So the networks fell into geometry quite well. The indices and exponentials now feel really fit together quite nicely with logarithms, because we now have the logarithmic scales there. So a logical grouping was to have a chapter with the indices, exponentials, and logarithms, rather than having indices and surds. And the surds is now with the measurement. The counting techniques, the 10A counting techniques, fitted very well with probability. And this provided a remainder, and the remainder is all the work on polynomials and functions and those other 10A graphs that I mentioned before. And so this fell very nicely together as a chapter 10, with the logarithms out of chapter 10 now and in with chapter 3, retaining the 10A, of course, logarithm laws and so on, and still 10A material. But the chapter 10 is far more logical now with all that work on polynomials and functions and so on. So that feels a lot better with Year 10. In terms of refining what we've done, other things, of course, we've refined all the content right across the series. With the weaker students in mind, we really wanted to make sure that the early questions in the exercises were as accessible as possible to the widest possible audience. And so some work at the start of the exercises has been done to make sure there's easier grading and there's strong links with example 1, and no difficult components in example 1 and early questions in the exercise. So that was a focus for the authors. All the digital, of course, is going to be updated, things that many people would be used to, like the worksheets that are available to teachers, the fixed text, the tests, the digital auto-marked quizzes, the quick quizzes, all updated. And the videos, of course, for every example right across the series, all refined. A couple of other exciting new features of the series, and Scott, you might be able to give some background as why we chose to do this, but we now have a brand new resource, which is a printable skill sheet for every lesson, with one piece of paper maximum for this skill sheet, so that if teachers wish to print this off for a quick quiz at the start of the lesson, or even at the end, or even a homework quiz, they could do that very easily, with the questions, all the questions on the quiz strongly linked to the text examples and success criteria of the lesson, and something that we felt teachers wanted as part of the product.
Yeah, that's right, David. You've covered that very, very well. Not too much else to add, except that in the course of planning every one of our series, including this new Victorian Curriculum series, part of what we do is visit as many schools as we can and listen via email and other sources to get a sense of what schools would like us to provide for the next edition. This was a fairly consistent one, particularly for some of the lower level students, not just for those students, but it would probably be of particular benefit for those students. And that comment also goes for the next feature, David, that you're going to touch on, this exact thing. Also, something that many teachers were creating some version of this themselves. So It's something that that we have put a lot of time into creating one of these, which means that there's 400 and something of these slide PowerPoints across the series. But I'll let you add a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so in a similar way, a brand new resource. We did see many teachers spending time with the Cambridge resource and downloading images to create lesson plans and things to project for their students. And so we felt that it was appropriate that we present all that introductory material as a PowerPoint presentation. So if teachers wanted to skip through various aspects of that introduction, maybe the building understanding questions, they might want to put up the example to work through, links to the video, maybe the lesson starter, and ask students to then do the now you try questions and then put up the answers to those. So certainly something that we feel it might make life a bit easier for teachers in terms of lesson planning. And so they are the PowerPoint presentations for every lesson right across the series. Okay, so for the next thing, Scott will take over with this, but we're quite excited about perhaps one of the biggest items that we're adding in the series for this time round, and that is our new Diagnostic Assessment tool, which will become a key component of the digital features of the new series.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yep. So as you said, this is brand new for this particular edition. And as we go through the slides, one thing to keep in mind is that what we're going to be talking about is provided complementary with the online teaching suite in the sense that it's not some additional cost. So that's worth keeping in mind. So we don't have too much time left in this presentation because we want to make sure that there's time for Q&A, David. So we'll fly through some of these slides. But just to say, in terms of the reasons that we did this, a lot of work had gone into some schools' own homemade versions of this kind of diagnostic system, often using Cambridge content, so questions from the textbooks. And one of those spreadsheets that was sent to me had 16,920 cells for a single class. So that gives you a sense of the amount of manual work that went into creating a system like this. So suffice it to say, one of our main intentions was to really save teachers a lot of time. We'll get to the ways that we think this does that in the coming slides. But yeah, it was also a gap in terms of the suite of resources that we provide. We do a lot of things, obviously, in Cambridge in terms of our maths publishing and all the kinds of resources that we offer, but something like this diagnostic system was not one of them until now. So there are a handful of common complaints that we really wanted to keep in mind and not repeat. And a lot of these, without going into every single one of these dot points, a lot of it comes from the lack of control that a teacher had over a system like this. It had to do with all of the inbuilt algorithms, in the sense that the system was a black box. It worked in a particular way that was hidden to users of the system, and it resulted in a bunch of unintended consequences, like the repetition that students had to go through, having to repeat content multiple times just because they made a couple of silly mistakes, when really from other kinds of evidence it was clear that they could do that content, do those topics pretty comfortably, being misdiagnosed, assigned levels that weren't really accurate, students expressing negative feelings about the way that they were being scored, etc. So those were some of the things we wanted to keep in mind. Anyone who has seen me present on this in the past or talk to me would be sick of me going through these, but I think they're worth going through. These are the kinds of things that we put together right at the start of this project. presentation will be available to watch through, and you can kind of pause it and have a look at each one of these if you would like to. But essentially, we wanted the emphasis to be on growth as well as student attainment. We wanted the emphasis to be on providing evidence about student performance to teachers so that they would get useful information at the right time and then adjust their teaching accordingly, and to do some really good things with the resulting data as well. We also, from a student perspective, wanted to be able to provide individualized feedback. Again, that is controlled by the teacher, and we'll get to that in a bit more detail later on. We certainly wanted to make sure that it was not demotivating for students, but particularly for lower ability students. And we wanted to provide opportunities for self-reflection, reflection, and the ability for students to take responsibility for their own learning. And then from an administrator perspective or head of department, the ability for a manner of consistency to be made possible across a faculty when using a tool like this. So there's a range of things that are going to be possible with a tool like this. A lot of it has to do with the amount of flexibility that it offers a faculty and teachers. So, for example, teachers are in control of the amount of content that you want to cover in a unit of work. So you determine the size of that unit of work. You choose the amount of tests that you want to set during that unit of work according to various models that we know already exist amongst schools in Victoria and across Australia. So one example is a single pre-test followed by a post-test, or a pre-test, then a mid-topic test, and then a post-test, or instead of that model, a model that utilizes more smaller topic tests followed by a post-test at the end of a topic. It allows student results to be analysed at multiple levels of granularity, and David, you can talk about that a little bit later on in more detail. We wanted follow-up work to be able to be set in a customizable way that was very flexible and again, up to the teacher about how they do that. And we wanted to provide a nice suite of reports as well, many of them focusing on student growth. So in terms of flexibility, as a teaching group, you can start from the point of view of the curriculum if that's what you'd like to do, and then create tests on the basis of that. You can also start from the point of view of the textbook and then create tests and have the results show against the curriculum. And vice versa. You can share tests and sets of tests with other teachers. You can export the data. There are multiple wizards that are available at certain points within this tool to try and make things easier on teachers. We're proud of those because they do work quite well. They also allow customization as well. And it's also possible to reuse tests and groups of tests the following year with the next year's cohort. So just in terms of more details about the question content and the reporting, so some of those details are there. We don't really have time to go into the nitty-gritty of it, but there are 10,000 questions, so 5,000 questions in 2 banks. One bank of questions is intended to be used for the pre and mid-topic tests. The second bank, which contains twins of all of those questions in bank 2, is used for the post-tests. And at the core of everything is what we call mathematical skills, which are, in our view, it's our term to refer to the smallest testable unit that allows us to meaningfully measure students' proficiency as a student progresses through the curriculum. And those skills are very, very closely related to the worked examples in the series. The tool allows pre-mixed difficulty levels, so questions that contain a mix of difficulty levels, and you can select a mix like what you see on the screen there. David, we'll talk about this a little bit more later on. These are some screenshots of some of the reports. There are some basic ones that are similar to the kind of thing that you can do when creating a Goodman chart. You can also view results according to mathematical skill or textbook lesson, textbook chapter, etc., or content descriptor, subtopic, and strand and year level. So there are ways of zooming in and out to see results at different levels of detail. And you can see a couple of other reports there. These ones are they're very small, obviously, on this particular screen, but they emphasize viewing students' growth. So not just the level at which they are currently, but also how far they've come. That was a real point of emphasis for us. So, David, there's a lot in this tool. There's too much for us to go into all that much detail in this particular session. I encourage viewers of this webinar to go to that link there. Again, this presentation will be available later on, so you can have a look at that as well if you'd like more detail. A lot of how-to support will be made available, and of course you can contact your your education sales consultant as well for more information. So, David, I've talked a little bit about the motivations for the creation of this tool from my perspective and from the point of view of receiving feedback from teachers around Victoria. But when we were designing this, what were some of the motivations and things that you wanted to keep in mind from an authoring perspective? So that we'll start with that question, and then we'll move on to some other questions from the floor as well.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think the key reason for the creation of the tool was to provide teachers with a comprehensive but easy to use system to, identify the key skills that students need help with in relation to their current work. And so the idea really wasn't to replace other key forms of assessment like tests, which might have, extended response questions and so on, but something that could be controlled by the teacher in terms of content, difficulty and length, using a range of filters, which would also then be auto-marked as well. So to provide a diagnostic tool that sort of blended seamlessly also into the teacher's existing unit plan without the need to, say, run a separate system that's outside the Cambridge Interactive. From a teacher's perspective, we wanted it so that teachers could create multiple tests of varying size. So they might want to do a long test at the beginning, at the end of a topic, or even just shorter quizzes throughout the unit, testing particular skills that they have chosen based on the filters. So they could choose sections from the textbook, and then they would get all the skills associated and linked with those examples. Or if they wanted to, they could choose skills that are linked to the curriculum rather than the textbook. And they could use one of the 6 reporting tools then to quickly receive feedback on the individual strengths and weaknesses of their students. So they could, for example, identify key skills of some students or the whole class. They might be having trouble with certain things, and that would be visible with the reporting that is received through the system. They may wish to obtain a clearer picture on how students are progressing and if there's evidence of growth, for example. It's probably worth mentioning that the algorithm that's used in the background will automatically maximize the coverage of the key skills selected regardless of the teacher's choice of difficulty level. So essentially the algorithm's designed to prioritize hitting all the skills required depending on the teacher's content selection, while also having the desired difficulty profile selected by the teacher.
That's right. So a teacher can set questions manually if they like from scratch. You can drill down from the structure of the textbook or the curriculum to choose questions. But you can also start from the wizard if that's what you would like, which works in the way that you've just described, David. But then you can edit from that perspective as well, and change things, add questions as well. How about, I mean, you've been a head of department for a really long time, David. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the convenience from a teaching point of view? So as a teacher is going through their course plan using the Victorian Curriculum 2.0 textbook, so we've just been talking about, how does this tool fit into that picture?
Well, the tool will quickly identify the key skills that need attention. And so combined with the teacher control and teacher input, students can be supplied with those recommended tasks. So rather than sort of thinking, what should we do to sort of deal with these types of performances on tests and things, the system will pick up on those skills that haven't been met and then automatically deliver via the system a set of tasks for the students to do. And so with a level of teaching control, the diagnostic tool can deliver these tasks corresponding to the areas of greatest weakness. And we call this, I think we call it follow-up work, don't we, Scott?
That's right, yep.
Yeah, and this could include things like key skills, examples to link to, the now you try questions, but also selected problems from the exercise which correspond to those key skills. Now, all the examples in the text are linked really closely to the skills in the diagnostic tool. So students and teachers should find that the follow-up work is not a distraction or a complete add-on to their work, but something they can easily attach to their work, their homework, and as part of the exercise.
Yep, that's right. And in a similar way to other aspects of the tool, the teacher is in control of how much follow-up work a student gets, but particularly if there may be a lot of gaps in learning, but a teacher can choose the most important ones. All right, so we've got quite a few questions that have come through. Ben, what kind of things are people asking about? So one question, David, I can see is just to start us off here: is the testing in the tool adaptive or not?
Okay, so it is not self-adaptive where students are sort of going off on their own adventure. No, that was against the philosophy. We wanted teachers to be able to control the lesson content, the delivery, the hook, the now you try and the examples with all the differentiated learning pathways and so on and so forth. But teachers have control on the level of difficulty of each diagnostic test, right? So they can choose from the easy and medium challenging choice of questions. And then the tests will be designed to cater for that different level of background. So teachers have a very high level of control, but students will not be sort of getting a different test if they get one question right or one question wrong as they go along.
Yeah, that's right. Ben, any other questions?
Yeah, so there's a few questions. Looks like there's a common one about when will the diagnostic tool be ready, and will schools start trialing? For that question, I think probably the best thing is to reach out to your sales rep, because there are trials that now they'll be able to go through the tool with you, walk you through it, give you a demo, and then and then there was more questions about the modeling and investigation tasks. Do they have example solutions? Come to David.
Yes, you want to that one?
I think that we have suggested ideas and answer suggestions as part of the teacher resources. Same goes for the computational thinking and technology activities as well.
Yep. Here's an interesting one, David, and it touches on both the digital version of the textbook, but also the diagnostic content as well. Do students have access to the interactive textbook according to the level that they are working at within each topic? So could you talk a little bit about the consolidating and extension material that's in each book, but also the diagnostic content that is connected to those?
Yeah, so teachers would be aware that the level of differentiation operates at different levels. So you have your consolidating sections and your core and your extending sections. So you can look at the different levels of differentiation there. And then within the exercises, we of course have that level of grading and the more challenging problem-solving questions, for example, and the enrichment. And that corresponds to some degree to the diagnostic questions. So where the diagnostic questions are divided up into easy, medium, and hard, we would find that the hard questions or the challenging questions, which teachers can choose as part of their test if they wish, correspond more closely to those more challenging fluency or problem-solving questions, for example. However, we did want to make sure that the diagnostic tool is linked strongly to the key skills and the example. So every question does correspond closely to an example. And the examples are not all straightforward. So there are easy examples and there are more challenging examples. And so we looked at the more challenging types of parts in the examples as a resource to create those more challenging questions in the diagnostic tool.
Yep. And just a follow up from Andrea. Apologies, Andrea. I think I misunderstood your question. This might be, I'll put it out there and David might have a response, but we might need to get back to you separately just because of the detail that might be involved. Andrea says she was referring to the Victorian curriculum levels.
So the different difficulty in the Victorian curriculum?
Yeah, Andrea, we'll follow up with you on that and provide a proper answer separate to this.
Obviously, there is the higher level of content descriptors with the 10A.
Yeah.
And the Cambridge have also made an assessment as to what might be an easier or a higher level content area, and where we have or we wish to have those stronger connections between a particular year level's content and the next year level's content, we may have actually gone beyond the curriculum, but we have titled those sections extending very clearly throughout the series.
Yeah, that's right. So a couple other questions, as Ben said, about when this tool would be available to trial. I think that it's pretty much ready to go, or it will be ready very, very soon. So I encourage you to get in touch with your sales consultant for your school and to ask them to be able to trial it. And we look forward to your feedback. So I think, David and Ben, that really gets us to the end of the questions. If there's anything that we haven't been able to answer in the time that we have had, or we haven't answered it to in the appropriate level of detail, we have a copy of all the questions, so we'll get back to you separately as well. Over to you, Marcus.
Yeah, thanks very much, Scott and David and Ben. As we've noticed, there were quite a few questions in the chat box about pricing, availability, of course, new products. So everyone would like to know when they're going to be ready. So print and digital. So the student book comes with a digital code inside the front cover, $74.95, $59.95 for the digital only, and the online teaching suite, which, as David and Scott have mentioned, it includes all of those teacher resources, including the new diagnostic assessment tool, the skill sheets, the PowerPoints, the work solutions, the reports, and all of those things. So $149.95 if you're purchasing that. However, if your school decides to buy class sets or book list our books, we do provide free access to your teachers to the online teaching suite. We do have advanced copies available now of the books. So if you want to have a look at one, we can send those out straight away. I believe our bulk stock, if you're purchasing class sets and more, they'll be coming very early next term, as will the digital-only interactive textbook, and the online teaching suite will be a little bit later in term 3. So to answer some of your questions, yes, it definitely will be available, the diagnostic assessment tool as part of that to start using this year in term 3. If you desperately need to have a look at the diagnostic assessment tool, this was introduced as part of our Australian curriculum editions last year. So that could be a possibility if you just want to have a bit more of a look at it straight away. We also have our contact, so we might jump to the next slide. If you've got any more questions that weren't covered today, or you'd like to get your hands on a copy of the books, here are your relevant contacts. So Emma, Lamone, Kim and myself for Victoria. We cover all those different regions as they're listed there. So yeah, please get in touch with the appropriate person. So I'd just like to finish on behalf of Cambridge University Press and Assessment by thanking David, Scott and Ben for their contributions this evening. And we wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.